So I want to share with you my story, how I got here, how I became an astronaut. I was just 6 years old when the first American astronaut launched into space. That was a long time ago, back in May of 1961. And at my elementary or primary school up in Cleveland, Ohio, here in the United States, they brought all the students to our gymnasium, and I sat on the floor and watched the launch on a small black and white TV. And as soon as our astronaut had made it to space that day, I remember sitting there very clearly saying, I want to do that. So ever since I was 6, I knew I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to ride a rocket. I wanted to experience zero gravity floating around in space. And I wanted to see the sunrises and sunsets with my own eyes that the astronauts would describe. So I always knew what I wanted to do. The problem is, how do you get there? How do you become an astronaut? And as a young boy, I didn't know how to do this. We only had 7 American astronauts at that time, and I didn't know any of them. But the one thing I recognized early on was it was going to be very difficult. I knew there was a lot of competition. Thousands of people apply to be an astronaut, and then a small handful get selected. So I knew as a young boy, my only shot of ever making it to space was going to have to involve me working hard and doing my best in school every single day. After high school, I went on to university and got my bachelor's degree in physics, one of the sciences. And that was the minimum degree you needed to become an astronaut. But I knew the competition was going to be tough. So I thought I can't start applying to NASA to be an astronaut with just the bare minimum requirements. So I stayed in university and I got my master's degree and my PhD in engineering. And it was at this point then that I started applying to NASA to become an astronaut. 2 years after I finished university, NASA put out the announcement they needed new astronauts. I was all excited. I wrote to them. I got the application form, carefully filled it out. I mailed it back in, and you could probably guess what happened. They turned me down. They said no thanks. I was surprised, but I didn't give up. I decided, well, I'll try again. 2 years later, they had another astronaut selection. I got another application form, filled it out, sent it in, and then that second time, I got turned down again. At this point, I realized I needed to do more to get noticed by NASA. And being an engineer, what I did is I studied the data. I carefully looked at the background of the astronauts that were successful getting into the program to see what do they have that I don't have? What am I missing here? What education or background or experiences? And by carefully studying that, I learned a few things. The first thing was that most of the astronauts they were selecting already had flying experience. I started taking flying lessons and I got my pilot's license. I also noticed most of the astronauts that they were selecting had some parachuting or skydiving experience. So I learned to do that. I also taught a university course because that seemed to be experience that NASA was looking for. So I worked on these activities for 3 years. Then there was another astronaut selection. This is number 3. I sent my application in, and this time NASA called me up and they invited me down to the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. And out of the thousands of people that apply, NASA will select 100 individuals. They bring you to Houston, Texas, and you spend a full week on a very thorough medical exam. And then there's a 1-hour interview. I passed all the medical tests. That went very well. And I went on to the interview, and that went extremely well. So at the end of my week with NASA, I thought, boy, that couldn't have gone any better for me. And I went back to my job and just sat there and waited to see, did I make it or not this time? And I was back at my job about a week or so when some of my friends started calling me up from across the country. They called up and said, hey, Don, the FBI and the police have been calling about you. NASA was doing a security background check on me, and they looked into my background. They checked the police records wherever I lived to see if I'd ever been in trouble. They met with all my bosses from every company when I was 15 years old on. They would meet with my former bosses and ask them, what kind of worker was Don? Did he show up to work on time? How did he treat the customers? How did he treat the coworkers? And then they went up and down the streets in any neighborhood, wherever I lived, talking to the neighbors, asking, hey, what can you tell us about Don Thomas and how did he treat people in the neighborhood? And it was 2 months later, I got the phone call from NASA. They called up and said, Don, thank you very much for applying. We had a lot of good candidates. We did not select you, but good luck in the future. Are there any more of these little things that I can do to improve my chances, to make myself a better candidate? And once again, by carefully studying who they were selecting and who they weren't selecting, I noticed that most of the civilian astronauts that they were picking, they were individuals that were already working down at the NASA Johnson Space Center. Job with NASA as an engineer working on the space shuttle program. I did that for 3 years. Then they had another astronaut selection, number 4. I sent my application in. They called me up for the medical testing and the interviews, and that all went very well once again. And then it was about 3 months later, I got another phone call from NASA. And this time they called up and just said, "Hey, Don, are you still interested in being an astronaut? Because we'd like to offer you the job." I said yes. I hung up that phone. And for the next 10 minutes, I was jumping up and down, yelling and screaming because I knew I made it into the astronaut program. I was 35 years old when I got that call, and I started a 4-year training program for my first flight. So the first time I made it to space, I was 39 years old. So it took time for me to get there. But the number one lessons that I've learned in my life that I want to share with you this evening is to always work hard. You want to do your best in school every single day, not just Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but every day on every subject. You want to give it your absolute best effort. And you need to be patient because some of these dreams that we have, it takes time. It took me till I was 39 years old to make it to space. But boy, was it ever worth all the hard work and the time that I put in there. So I tell people, do not give up on your dreams. You may get rejected, you'll get turned down, it may seem impossible. Do not give up. Keep working towards your goal, keep working towards your dream, and you can accomplish your dream in life just like I was able to do.